I'm very happy to welcome you all once again to this course on inferential discrete mathematics. In the previous lesson we had an introduction to algebraic systems. We learned what are called as semi-groups, monoids and also groups. We saw numerous examples on what algebraic systems got the special status as a group. We found that not all of them were groups, some of them were only monoids, some of them were only algebraic systems, some of them were only semi-groups, but a few of them were all of semi-groups, monoids as well as groups. To give you a recap, this set of 4 conditions is what is to be satisfied by an algebraic system to be called as a group. The set should be closed within the operation, which means that the operation performed, the binary operation performed on any 2 elements should result in an answer which is contained within the set. And number 2, the operation should be associative. We have seen numerous examples for this, and there must exist a special element called the identity element such that that element when operated with any other element returns that particular element. So E is our identity element. E with any element A will give us back the A. And for the 4th condition, exclusive to groups alone, we also saw that every element should also have its own inverse element defined. Only then we can call the algebraic system as a group. We saw a very simple example in the set of all integers which was found to be a group. The set of all real numbers with multiplication did not form a group. Set of all natural numbers did not form a group, both under addition as well as multiplication. We saw that the real numbers did form a group under addition though, and we saw that the real numbers formed a group under multiplication if we cast aside the 0 element. We also saw a special finite group with only 4 elements. All groups seen until then were infinite in size. Only this group called the set of all 4th roots of unity, they are the solution to the equation the elements in this group are the solution to the equation x power 4 is equal to 1. If x power 4 is equal to 1, x can be any of these 4 elements, and we saw that these 4 elements did actually form a group. We also saw the group with respect to the addition modulo operation with the 5 as the base number. The group had 4 elements, and this set also satisfied all conditions required for it to become a group. We also had one last example for multiplication modulo also, containing 4 numbers 1, 3, 5 and 7, where the operation was multiplication modulo 8. We considered this special operation and we saw that the multiplication modulo 8 also formed a group when it is paired up with the 4 elements 1, 3, 5 and 7. That is where we stopped in last class. In today's class we will have a look at another wide range of groups that you can define by yourselves, and we will have an introduction to what are called as abelian groups. An abelian group is a group in which the operation star is commutative. What do we mean by commutative? The result does not change if you change the order. A star B and B star A are supposed to return the same answer. Such a group is what you call as an abelian group. So any group, it should first of all be a group, and it will get the additional status as being abelian if the operation star is also commutative. And all the groups that we have seen yesterday, provided they are groups, they also qualify to be something called as an abelian group, because all operations we have performed so far have been simple enough. They have been only based on addition and multiplication, both of which are commutative operations, and therefore the group on integers on real numbers, on addition modulo 5, on real numbers with multiplication, the 4th roots of unity, and 1357 with x8, the multiplication modulo 8. All these 6 examples are examples for abelian groups. But you may ask, does it mean that all groups are actually abelian groups? No, there are certain groups which are strictly non-abelian, groups in which the operation is not commutative. We will have a look at some of them today. To give you an insight into such a group, let us first consider the set of all 2 by 2 matrices under the operation of matrix addition. Matrix addition is a simple enough operation. You will just add element wise. How do you do matrix addition? Suppose I have 1, 2, 3, 4 on one and 5, 6, 7, 8 on the other. I will just add the number element wise. So that is how matrix addition is performed, you know that. And this operation paired up with all matrices whose order is the same, it is all matrices of order 2 by 2. This example talks only about matrices of the second order. You are welcome to discuss the cases where the matrices have higher orders, but you will still find that as long as the order is the same, all matrices form a group under the operation of matrix addition. We will see why that is. Because first up, if you are restricting your matrices to integers alone, if the entries in the matrix are strictly integers, then you will obviously see that the sum of 2 integers is again another integer. Therefore, you will not add 2 integer matrices and get a matrix whose entries are fractions, you will never do that. So the set is obviously closed. You add any 2 matrices of order 2 by 2, you will get another matrix of order 2 by 2. So the set is going to remain closed. That is the first condition. And number 2, you can verify for yourselves and see that matrix addition is associative. First of all, addition itself is associative, and since matrix addition involves only element wise addition, it is obvious to see that matrix addition also turns out to be associative. And number 3, we talked about the third condition to be met by the elements of the set, and the condition is that the set should definitely contain with itself a special element called the additive identity if it is addition. And since we talk about matrix addition as an operation, the identity element will be the 0 matrix, a matrix full of zeros. So there are 2 rows and 2 columns, all of which are zeros, and then you will find that when addition happens, A, B, C, D with 0, 0, 0, 0, a 2 by 2 matrix filled up with zeros is going to return A, B, C, D again in any order possible, and therefore the matrix, the 0 matrix, some textbooks also refer to this as the null matrix. This null matrix forms the identity element of the group. Further, you also need to define an element called as the additive inverse. So there should be one more matrix which when added with ABCD is going to give me back the matrix that we saw in the previous slide, is going to return the 0 matrix, and that can be easily obtained by flipping the signs. If you have ABCD, you will just flip the signs to get minus A, minus B, minus C and minus D as a 2 by 2 matrix. Now when that matrix is going to get added with ABCD, we will get back the additive identity that we saw in the previous slide. Hence any 2 by 2 matrix will also have its own inverse matrix defined within the set. Now if A is an integer, minus A is not going to be a fraction, minus A is still an integer. So you are going to get back integer entries in a 2 by 2 matrix. Therefore every matrix will have its own inverse, and that is why you will see that the set of all 2 by 2 matrices will actually form a group under this operation of matrix addition. And it is also obvious that matrix addition is commutative, because you are going to do only element wise addition, and element wise addition has always been commutative ever since addition was considered as a binary operation. Hence you will see that this group is also abelian. It is an abelian group. This group of the set of all 2 by 2 matrices under the operation of matrix addition will also turn out to be an abelian group. So it is a semi group first of all, it is also a monoid in addition, it also happens to be a group, and we do not stop right there, it also happens to be an abelian group. But as I promised you, I will also give you an example of a group that is non-abelian, and the simplest non-abelian group that you can think of as of now is the group on matrices of the same order, but the operation that you will consider this time around is matrix multiplication. Now matrix multiplication, unlike matrix addition, is not done element wise. You have learned the algorithm. You will match up the rows of the first matrix with the column of the second matrix and then do your multiplication. So that is not element wise multiplication, that is row and column together, and therefore it is obviously known that matrix multiplication is not commutative, but we will first verify that the set of 2 by 2 matrices that are non-singular. What do we mean by non-singular? Matrices whose determinant is non-zero. Such matrices are considered, and the operation involved is matrix multiplication, and you will see that it is actually a group. Number 1, it happens to be closed under the operation of matrix multiplication. You take any two of them and you do the multiplication by using the simple algorithm, you will end up with another 2 by 2 matrix which has real numbers as entries. Now we have relaxed the condition, we have not taken integer entries here, we have also admitted real numbers, and you will still see that the answers will be 2 by 2 matrices containing only real numbers. Therefore the set is going to remain closed, and it is a simple exercise to find out that matrix multiplication is actually associative as well. So the second condition is still satisfied, and therefore you will see that this set actually forms a semi group. Moving ahead, you will also see that you have a special element called the identity element, which returns the matrix that it is multiplied with. That identity element happens to be the identity matrix, matrix on 2 rows and 2 columns of this kind. That turns out to be your identity element to give you back whatever matrix it is multiplied with. So it also has become a monoid now. It was a semi group, now it is a monoid. Further, as long as the matrices are as non-singular, we can always define another matrix called as its own inverse. This is pretty obvious. You know that A inverse can be determined by the simple formula on the adjoint of A divided by the determinant of A. Now as long as A is non-singular, determinant is not going to be 0, therefore division is allowed, and therefore you will have some matrix defined as the inverse of any given matrix, and hence you will see that the set of all 2 by 2 matrices which are non-singular is not only a semi group, is not only a monoid, is also a group. But unfortunately it stops right there. It cannot form an abelian group because matrix multiplication need not be commutative. Can be commutative sometimes, but not always. Can be commutative. Some matrices may give you the same answer, but not all matrices all the time. And since matrix multiplication doesn't turn out to be commutative, you don't have an abelian group here. So that's the first example that we have discussed for a group that is non-abelian. Until now, whenever an algebraic structure has actually been given the status as a group, has turned out to be abelian. Now, the first time you have a group that is non-abelian, because the abelian nature demands that A star B and B star A are same for any two elements A and B. Now, going back to the definition, you will see that this kind of a condition is true when one of the elements is the identity or one of the elements is an inverse, because when you add 2 and minus 2 you will get 0 in whatever order you add them, but that is because 2 and minus 2 are inverses of each other, and 2 with 0 will give you 2 even when you do it the other way. So, you will get back 2. So, it is still commutative, but here we are considering special elements. In the first case it was the special element called the inverse. The second case it was the special element called the identity element, but the nature of the abelian group demands that whatever be the element, be it special element or not, the operation should be commutative, and that is why not all groups will turn out to be abelian. All groups will turn out to satisfy this nature for some specific elements, but not all of them, and therefore we have the first example for a group that is non-abelian. The matrix set of all 2 by 2 non-singular matrices does not form a non-abelian group. It forms a group nonetheless, but only that much, nothing ahead of that. Moving further, let us discuss something that is common to all groups, a set of properties that is common to every group that you can ever consider. Whenever an algebraic system actually forms a group, you will see that it has these properties which can be easily observed. Number 1 is that the identity element is unique. Consider any group, there is only one element E such that A star E and E star A are the same. Only one element such that this happens. If it's addition, it's only 0 such that you get back 2. If it's multiplication, it's only 1 such that you get back 3. There are no other elements which satisfy the conditions required for an identity element. So, hence it is unique. You cannot have more than one identity elements in a group. There is one and only one, and that is why it is special. Next property is that the left cancellation law will hold good in any group, which means suppose I have 2 plus 3 is 5 or 2 plus x is 5. Generally, when you are solving an equation, how do you proceed? When you have 2 plus x is 5, you find x by adding minus 2 to both sides, therefore getting the answer as 3. So, this option where you are cancelling the minus 2 that is on both sides is what you call as the left cancellation law. You are cancelling it from the left. Here it is in the right, forget that, it is from the left. Whenever A star B is same as A star C, I can cancel the A's and get B is equal to C. This is possible only when the algebraic system is a group, and this also happens to be the same if you do the cancellation from the right. C star A is equal to B star A, then you can deduce that C is equal to B. In general mathematics, in like primary school algebra or middle school algebra, you are encouraged to cancel the A on both sides and get C is equal to B, but you cannot always cancel. You can cancel only when the elements A, B and C come from a proper group, because what do you mean when you are cancelling is you are operating on both sides by the inverse of A. Therefore, these two elements will give us E again, and these two elements will give us an E again, and C with E is C, B with E is B. I get back my C is equal to B, but that's allowed only when this element is actually part of the group. That is why we say that the left cancellation law and the right cancellation law hold only in a group, not a monoid, not a semi group, not a set. All your elements should be part of a group to ensure that something like this happens. And the last property is that the inverse element is also unique. We saw in the first property that the identity element is unique. Similarly, the inverse element is also unique. What do we mean by saying this? I get the inverse of 2 as minus 2, which means 2 and minus 2 give me 0. I claim that there is only one element minus 2 which will fit the bill here. There is no, I cannot add 2 and minus 7 to get back 0. You will never get the identity element back for any other number added with 2. Similarly, the inverse of 2 by 7 is 7 by 2 to get back 1. No other element will give me 1 when I multiply that with 2 by 7. Or I am trying to say that whenever an element has an inverse, that inverse element is unique. You can't have two inverse elements for a given element of a group. So any element will have a maximum of only one inverse. It can't have more than one inverse as long as your part. Next up, let's discuss an important idea about subgroups. To give you an example of what a subgroup is, let's consider the set of all integers under the operation of addition, and let's consider one set H where I picked up and collected all even integers together. Now I am just curious to find out whether this will form a group by itself. So I have all integers in my set, all integers, which means all negative integers, minus 5, minus 4, minus 3, minus 2, minus 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. These are all integers, and we know that it forms a group. Now I am considering another set called H, which is only the set of all even integers. I don't want anything that is other than the even integers. I am just curious to find out if this subset, clearly H is a subset of G. I am just curious to find out whether H will also form a group. Whether this subset will also form a group. I am just interested to know about that. And what do we need for a group? We need 4 conditions. Number 1 is the closure property. Let's take any 2 even numbers and add them up. Any 2 even numbers will always give me another even number, so the set is closed. Next we talk about associative. Now we have already established the fact that addition is associative. Just because you are considering a smaller set doesn't mean that addition will not turn out to be associative. So it is also associative. Next up, we are looking for an identity element. The identity element happens to be 0, and 0 is part of this subgroup. Further, any even integer will also have another even integer to give me back the identity element. I will add 4 with minus 4 to get 0. The inverse of an even number cannot be an odd number. I cannot add 2 with 3 to get 0. I can only add 2 with minus 2 to get 0. Therefore, you will see that this set of all even integers, even though it is a subset of a larger set, it still forms a group. That is where we are interested in this notation called a subgroup. What do we call as a subgroup? A subgroup is a subset of a group which is already a group, but now this subset is a group in itself. I don't want all elements of G, I want only some elements, and I still see that it is a group. That's what you call as a subgroup. So the formal definition for this can be given like this: a non-empty subset of a group G star, a group G star is called a subgroup if it's a group by itself. So the set of all even integers, despite being only a subset of the set of all integers, still formed a group. So a subset forming a group is what we call as a subgroup. I can leave it to your choice. You can try H1 as the set of all even multiples, or set of all multiples of 3, and you will see that H is actually a subgroup. You can take the multiples of 4, it will form a subgroup, multiples of 5. So as long as you are considering all elements which are falling into a pattern, you will say that they do form a subgroup. I will explain this with another example. Let us consider the set of all 4th roots of unity containing 1, minus 1, I and minus I. We have already seen that this is a group. Now let us take a subgroup of it. Let us take only 1 and minus 1. This set is closed under the operation, because you multiply 1 and minus 1, you will either get minus 1 or plus 1. You can't get another element. So it still happens to be a closed set. And multiplication, we have already seen, is actually an associative operation, so you don't have to worry. And we have identified 1 as the multiplicative identity, and you see that the element 1 is part of the subset. I have not just considered minus 1, I have also included 1 when I am defining H. So since 1 and minus 1 are present, since 1 is present, that is the multiplicative identity, and that is part of the subset. What more, it also meets the 4th and the last condition. Every element has its own inverse. 1's inverse is 1 itself, because 1 times 1 is 1. Minus 1's inverse is minus 1, because minus 1 times minus 1 is plus 1 again. So 1 is its own inverse, minus 1 is its own inverse. There are only 2 elements, and we see that every element has an inverse, and therefore this clearly forms a subgroup. It is a subset of a larger group, but it forms a group by itself, and therefore we call it as a subgroup. But an important question at this point of time is, do we have to evaluate or verify whether the subset meets all 4 conditions? Because you are trying to show that the subset is a group, and for group we have 4 conditions. So should I check all the 4 conditions always? The answer is actually no. You don't have to check all the 4 conditions always. That is why you have, okay, we will just have a look at another example. The definition, the formal definition, that G star be a group and H be a non-empty subset of G, then H is said to be a subgroup if, number 1, it must be closed. Number 2, it should contain the ideal element. Number 3, every element should have an inverse. Now if you watch carefully, you will see that we have missed one condition down here. We have missed the condition where star needs to be associative. Star will be associative, because star is the same operation you use for G, and since you are only using it for a smaller set in I, in 1 and minus 1, it will obviously turn out to be associative. You don't have to verify that. So what have we learned here? You don't have to verify all 4 conditions. It is enough if you verify only 3 of them. The first being closed, the third being the existence of the identity element, and the last one being the existence of the inverse. If all of these are observed for a given subset, then it will automatically form a group. You don't have to check for the last condition, as in the operation being associative. But we can even improve the number of conditions to be tested. You can reduce it further by what is called as the 2 condition test. You don't have to verify all 3, not all 4. 2 of them are enough. That's what is given here. Number 1, every element has its own inverse. Because if that's not met, it's no point trying the other conditions, because it will never form a group. A group demands that every element has its own inverse, and if that's not going to happen, your set cannot form a group and you can stop right there. But suppose it has the ID element within itself, how do you show that it is actually a group? Now the theorem says it is enough if the set is closed. So you don't have to check for all 4 conditions. 2 are enough. Number 1 and number 3. Number 1 was about the set being closed. Number 2 was about the set being associative. Number 3 was about the set containing the ID element. The 4th was about the set also having an inverse for every element. Now you don't have to check for all these. It's enough if you check for the first and the third. You don't even have to check for the inverse element. It will be part of the set, because suppose you have A star B is equal to E, then B is the inverse of A. Inverse of A. But how do you check this? Let's consider a couple of examples. Let's show that both the groups we've considered so far actually pass the conditions required for the 2 condition test. Let's take the integers now. Integers, the group of the set of all integers wanted you to also include within themselves the addition operation. Now you have the addition operation, so you already know that it is associative, and therefore you won't have to check for it. We already saw this. It is enough if we check the closure, the identity and the inverse. Now what are we doing here is we are cutting one more condition. You don't even have to check for the identity. It is enough if it is closed, and it is enough if 1 minus 1, it's enough if the inverse of an element is part of the set. Now suppose you have a situation where you have this idea, but you are not able to show that all elements, the result of the operation on all elements may or may not be within the set. Draw the Cayley's table to help you. As long as the group is finite, you can always draw the Cayley's table, because for the second example I am considering the subset as 1 and minus 1. Now clearly 1 and minus 1 is closed, and clearly 1 is its own inverse, so it is part of the subset. Minus 1 is its own inverse, that is also part of the subset. So the first condition is satisfied, the second condition is satisfied. Now 1 and minus 1 will together form a subgroup of G star. They will together form a subgroup of G star. You don't have to worry about the other 2 conditions, because as long as you know that A star B belongs to H, and you know that A inverse always is part of the set, then A star A inverse is nothing but E that will always be part of the set. That is where we have decided on 2 conditions for a subgroup, the subset to become a subgroup. But it turns out that we can even reduce further. From 4 we came down to 3, from 3 we came down to 2, from 2 we can reduce further to 1 condition. It's enough if your subset satisfies this condition, you can call it as a subgroup. Now what is that condition? That G star be a group and H be any non-empty subset of G star, then it's enough if you check for this condition. For any 2 A and B in H, A star B inverse should belong to H. Now finding B inverse is nothing difficult, because be it a ordinary element or be it a special element, you are going to have an inverse defined, because that element is part of the group. So B inverse is always part of the group. So So B inverse is also part of the subset. So A star B inverse will always be part of the subset whenever H is a subgroup. So it is enough if you check only for this condition when you are testing to find out if a subset can form a subgroup. And here you will still see that is happening. You take any two elements, let's take the set of all integers and let's take H to be the set of all even integers. Let's pick any element 4 and let A be 4 and B denote 8. Now let's check for the one condition test. B inverse happens to be minus 8, so A plus of minus 8 is 4 plus of minus 8, which is minus 4, which still belongs to H, because minus 4 is still even. So you will see that you pick any two elements, operate the first one on the inverse of the second, the result will be part of the subgroup if it is a subgroup. So the two condition test and the one condition test helps us clearly identify whether a subset will form a subgroup. Next up, we are going to see an even more refined form of the condition whenever the group is finite. Let G be a finite group, then as long as A star B is in the set for any A and B, you will see that H is a subgroup. H is a subgroup. Next up, we define this term called the order of an element, order of a group. So whenever G is a finite group, the total number of elements contained in G is what you call as the order. Therefore, when you consider the set of all fourth roots of unity in 1 I minus I and plus I and a multiplication, you will say that this group has an order of 4. This group has an order of 4 because the corresponding set has only 4 elements. So when I consider Z phi plus 5, you can identify the order to be 5, because as I told you before, Z phi includes all reminders that you can get when you are dividing a number by 5. So when dividing a number by 5, there are only 5 possible reminders, either it is 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. So the order of any group is the number of elements present in the group. So 0, 1, 2, 3 and 4 are part of the set, therefore the order of the group is 5. Order of 1 minus 1 plus minus I is 4. So this notation is necessary because it helps us with a shortcut to find out whether a given subset can form a subgroup or not. That is what you learn under this idea called the Lagrange's theorem. The theorem states that whenever G star is a finite group and H is any subgroup of G star, then the order of H divides the order of G, or the number of elements in H is a factor of the number of elements in the group. Now this works, this definition is restricted only to finite groups. If your group is infinite, you call it as an infinite group or a group having an infinite order. Now as long as the group is finite, you will call the order of the group as the number of elements. To give you an example, let us consider this as a group. 1 minus 1 I minus I forms a group under multiplication. However, only 1 minus 1, only the subset 1 minus 1 is a subgroup of G, subgroup of G star. What happens if we consider the set 1 minus 1 and I? There are 3 elements here. Now I can use Lagrange's theorem to show that this cannot be a subgroup. There are other ways to justify that. 1 minus an I cannot form a subgroup because the inverse of I is minus I, and minus I isn't part of this set H1. Therefore, it cannot form a subgroup. But now I can use Lagrange's theorem to help me deduce that, because what the theorem states is, whenever H is a, give me a second, whenever H is a subgroup of G, order of H should divide order of G. So when you have 1 minus 1 I and minus I, and H is 1 minus 1, it clearly makes sense, because order of H is only 2 and order of G is 4, and we know that 2 divides 4. Now because it is a subgroup, this goes without saying. It's more like the conditional statement that we discussed in logic. If P then Q, this is what we discussed. If P then Q, if P is true, if H happens to be a subgroup, then order of H will happen to divide order of G. It's easy to identify this. Now there is also one more subgroup called H2 with only one element. It's called the trivial subgroup because it is only the identity element. Such subgroups are called as trivial subgroups, where there is nothing to check at all. It will obviously satisfy all conditions. It itself is the identity element. You will operate 1 any number of times on itself. You will multiply 1 with 1 any number of times. You are going to get 1. So the set is closed, and 1 is its own inverse. So it is also satisfying the third condition for a subgroup. So this is what you call as a trivial subgroup. And still 1 will divide 4. 1 is a divisor of 4 clearly. So once again, since H2 is a subgroup of G, order of H2, that is 1, will divide order of G, that is 4. Since H1 is a subgroup of G, order of H1, which is 2, will divide order of G, which is 4. All of this is possible because H1 and H2 are individually subgroups of the group G. Now I told you, I will show you why 1 minus 1 I will not form a subgroup. Obviously there is one reason, because I doesn't have its inverse within the set. But let us count the number of elements. Suppose this H3 is a subgroup. Suppose this H3 is a subgroup. Then order of H3 is 3, and you know that 3 doesn't divide 4. 3 cannot divide 4. 3 is not a factor of 4. That's a contradiction, and therefore this cannot form a subgroup. Cannot form a subgroup. That's what we learn using the Lagrange's theorem. Whenever a subset forms a subgroup, the number of elements in the subset will divide the number of elements in the entire group. They will be factors and multiples. That's how they are related. But the converse is not true. You know that. We've already discussed this before. Whenever you have a conditional, it's equivalent only to its contrapositive and not its converse. So just because you pick a couple of elements, 1 and I, you can't say H4 is a subgroup. Just because order of H4 divides order of G, you can't say it's subgroup. The converse is not true. I have only P to Q. P to Q is equivalent only to this contrapositive. It's not equivalent to Q to P. So just because you have defined a subset having only 2 elements, you can't call it as a subgroup. That's not how a conditional statement works. Only when H is a subgroup, order of H will divide order of G. So it's only a one-way conditional. You must be certain that H is a subgroup. Only then you will see that order of H will divide order of G. and since any conditional is also equivalent to its contrapositive, we can show that certain subsets will never form a subgroup, like H3. H3 has only 3 elements and 3 never divides 4, and therefore H3 can never form a subgroup of G, and we have already justified why that is. So one way of showing that a subset is not a subgroup is directly by verifying it with Lagrange's theorem, and then if that doesn't work, you can check with other conditions. So Lagrange's theorem is the strongest theorem connecting the order of a group to the order of the subgroup, and you can use it many ways to verify whether a given subset may or may not form a subgroup. This can never form a subgroup because 3 doesn't divide 4. This may or may not, because 2 divides 4, you know that, but that doesn't imply H4 will form a subgroup of G. That is why you investigate further. You see if the inverse is present, you see if it is closed, you see if it is identity is part of it, you will see that inverse is not present. H4 is not a subgroup of G. Even though it's a subset, it's not a subgroup. So the Lagrange's theorem can be used in 2 ways: to verify that it is actually a subgroup, and to show that it can never, a given subset can never form a subgroup. I'll give you one more example for the same. Let's consider the set of all integers modulo 8. Integers modulo 8 is similar to what we discussed yesterday. It's just the set of all reminders you get when you divide a number by 8. So Z8 will contain 8 elements: 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. Only these 8 reminders are possible, and I put all of them inside a box. But the operation I am discussing here is not just addition, it is addition modulo 8. So we will add 2 numbers, we have discussed this earlier. We add 2 numbers, the sum is less than 8, you return the number. The sum is greater than 8, you will divide the number by 8 and return the remainder. For example, let us pick 3 and 6. 3 and 6 actually give us the number 9 as the answer, and since the 9 is greater than 8, we will divide 9 by 8 and get the answer as 1. 3 and 6 is 1. Now you can verify that it is actually an abelian group. I will leave it as an exercise to you. You can ask me if you have any doubts on that during our webinar. You can ask me a question on this. The set of all reminders when you divide any number by 8 always forms an abelian group under the addition modulo 8. You can check that. Now within that set, I am considering a small subset called H. H is going to contain only these 4 elements. I have considered 2 subsets. I will discuss one after the other. Let's consider H, which is actually containing 4 elements: 0, 2, 4 and 6. You will obviously see that this is a subgroup, because first of all it is closed. You are not going to get any number outside set. You add 2 and 4, you will get 6. You add 2 and 6, you will get 8, which is 0. You will add 2 and 2, you will get 4, which is once again here. Clear? You can do all. You can draw a Cayley's table with 4 rows and 4 columns, and you will in fact, let me do it for you. 0, 2, 4 and 6 with 0, 2, 4 and 6. This column will be 0, 2, 4 and 6. This will also be 0, 2, 4 and 6. 2 and 2 will give me 4, 2 and 4 will give me 6, 2 and 6 will give me 8, which is actually 0. 4 and 2 will give me 6, 4 and 4 is 8, which is 0. 4 and 6 is 10, 10 which actually leaves a remainder of 2. 6 and 2 is 8, which is 0. 6 and 4 is 10, which is 2, and 6 and 6 is 12, which is 4. So I complete drawing the Cayley's table and see that it is closed under this operation. I don't have to check for associativity because it is already a group, and I am only considering a smaller set. I am not changing the operation involved. So associativeness will be involved, and 0 is obviously the identity element, and for the inverse, 2 is the inverse of 6, 6 is the inverse of 2, 4 is the inverse of itself. So it actually forms a subgroup. But the surprise is, let us count the number of elements. Order of H, it has 4 elements. which clearly divides 8, the number of elements in the actual group. So Lagrange's theorem can be related with, in this example, the number of elements in the subgroup will divide the number of elements in the group. And that's not only true for this group, you can also try a different group. What happens if you consider h dash? H dash is only 4, 0 and 4. Checking this is too easy. Only 0 and 4, 0 and 4. 0 with 0 is 0, 0 with 4 is 4. 4 with 0 is 4. And 4 with 4 is 8 is actually 0. So 4 is its own inverse, 0 is its own inverse, the set is closed, the set has an identity element, therefore this subset obviously forms a subgroup. But what's the surprise again here? Consider the order of h dash, which is 2, and 2 clearly divides 8. But just because 2 divides 8, you cannot call this as a subgroup. 2 divides 8, alright, but h double dash cannot form a subgroup of G, because when you pick 0 and 3, it automatically fails in one condition, the inverse of 3. The inverse of 3 is 5, 5 is absent, and 3 and 3 actually supposed to give you 6. 6 is not even part of the set, it's not closed, it doesn't have an inverse, therefore this can't form a subgroup. So the converse of Lagrange's theorem is not true. If H is a subgroup, then order of H divides order of G. But just because order of H divides order of G, you can't say H is a subgroup. But you can still apply the contrapositive. Suppose I give you another set H triple dash which has 3 elements. This cannot form a subgroup. Clearly obvious, because there are 3 elements, 3 doesn't divide 8. I don't even have to check for the properties, because it will not be satisfied, because 2 and 2 is 4, 4 is not part of the set. 6 and 2 is okay, 6 and 2 is 8, that's fine. 6 plus 6 is 12, 12 is nothing but 4, 4 is not part of the set. Set is not even closed. Even though 2 and 6 are inverses of each other, you will see that the set is not closed, hence it cannot form a subgroup. But I can skip all these reasoning and directly give Lagrange's theorem as my argument. Order of H double dash is 3, H dash is 3, 3 doesn't divide 8, therefore H double dash cannot form a subgroup of G. So you can use the Lagrange's theorem and tweak it around to find out if a given set may or may not form a subgroup of a group G star. So the next thing that we will consider is the order of an element. We just saw what the order of a group is. It clearly is the number of elements, and we saw that it is preferably defined only for finite groups. Now for the same set of finite groups, you can also define something called as the order of an element. The order of an element is the least positive integer such that you repeat A with itself so many number of times to get back the identity element. I'll give you an example. I'll go back to the set of 4th roots of unity with multiplication as the operation. We have already seen that it is a group. In fact, this was the first finite group that we discussed. It's a group, it's also finite. In fact, it is also abelian. Now let's try and write down the order of every element given here. What do I mean by the order? I'll repeat the element with itself so many number of times, as in n, to get back the identity element. It might look a bit difficult, but you will understand better with an example. The order of -1 is 2, because 2 is the smallest element such that -1 times -1 is +1. Of course, you can multiply -1 with itself for 4 times to get back +1, but the smallest positive integer is what we are after. smallest positive integer. Let's talk about I. I with itself is I written twice is -1, I written thrice is -I. So the order is not 1, the order is not 2, the order is not 3, but you will see that the order is 4. I times I times I is actually +1. Of course, I power 8 is +1, I power 12 is +1, I power 16 is +1, but the smallest positive integer for which this thing is observed is 4. Therefore, order of I is 4. Similarly, you can also verify that the order of -I is also 4. And order of 1 is 1 only, because 1 is 1. You don't have to repeat it any number of times, you always get back the same number. So this is how you understand the concept of the order of an element. For a group it is totally different, you just count, you give the answer as the order. But for an element, whenever the group is finite, you will decide on the order of an element by repeatedly operating the element with itself. And how far will you go? You will go as far as getting the identity element. Now as soon as you get it, you stop. Count the number of times you have done this, and the smallest number of times it will give you such a result is what you called as the order of a given element. But the same example can also be given. So 1 is done. Let's do it for Z8 plus 8. Now Z8 plus 8 has 8 elements in 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. Let's forget about 0. 0 is the identity element. Order of 0 is 1. Order of 0 is 1. What can you say about order of 1? How many times are you supposed to add 1 with 1 again until you get a 0? If it's a normal addition process, you will never get a 0. 1 added any number of times will never be 0. But here the operation involved is addition modulo 8. So if the number is going to be smaller than 8, you are going to return it. If the number is going to be larger than 8, you are going to return the remainder. So let's check it out. The answer is pretty easy. 1 plus 1 is 2. 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3. 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 4. 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 5. None of them is 0. 1 added 6 times is 6. 1 added 7 times is 7. None of them is 0 so far, but 1 added 8 times is actually 8. But since the 8 is equivalent to 8, 8 is this giving you 0. So the smallest number of times for which you will have to add 1 with itself to get back the 0 is 8. So order of 1 is 8. For 2 it is easy. For 2 it is 4, because 2 and 2 and 2 will give you 6. 2 added 4 times with itself will give you 8. So order of 2 is 4. Order of 4 is 2 again, because 4 once is 4, 4 twice is 4 plus 4, which is 8, and 8 is 0. So you are operating 4 on itself twice, 2 number of times to get back 8, which is 0. Order of 6, 6 and 6 give you 12, 12 is 4. 6 and 6 and 6, the 18, 18 is 2. But 6 added 4 times will give you 24, which is actually a 0 answer. Because 24 returns the remainder 0 when you divide it by 8. We have done 0, we have done 4, we have done 2, we have done 6. All other elements will have an order as 8. Order of 1 is 8, order of 5 is 8, order of 7 is 8. Because you have to add 3 8 times to get a multiple of 8. You will have to add 5 8 times to get a multiple of 8. You have to add 7 8 times to get a multiple of 8. So all of these have the order of 8. So that is how you find the order of an element. You will have to repeat it so many number of times to get back the identity element. It may be different. Certain groups will have the identity element as 0, certain groups will have it as 1. So you will just have to worry about how many times you are going to do this to get back that special element. That is how you understand the order. But if you have a look at this order that we have found out, we have done 2 examples. You have the opportunity to make a lot of observations on this. Number 1, the order of an element A and the order of its inverse are always same. On the previous slide we saw 3 and 5 had the same order because 3 and 5 are inverses of each other. 6 and 2 had the same order. This was 8, this was 4. 1 and 7 had the same order. Both were 8. And obviously 4 is the inverse of itself, so is the inverse of the same thing. And in the previous example, we saw order of I is equal to order of minus I. You will have to repeat I 4 times to get 1. So order of I is 4. And the same happens with minus I. Minus 1 is its own inverse, so you don't have to compare with anything. So for any finite group, order of A, an element, order of any element, and order of its inverse element are one and the same. And number 2, whenever you have a finite element, order of any element A is going to be less than or equal to the order of the entire group whenever G is finite. In the previous example, you can find evidences of this result. Order of 0 is 1, order of 4 is 2, order of 6 and 2 is 4, order of 1, 3, 5, 7 are 8. All of which you have one order in 1, in 2, in 4 and in 8. All of which are less than or equal to 8, number 1, and all of them divide 8. All of them 1 divides 8, 2 divides 8, 4 divides 8, 8 divides 8. That's the second observation you can make. Order of A is always less than or equal to order of G, and order of A is always dividing the order of G. So it's a factor of the order, some factor of the order. So whenever you find the order of any element, you can make all of these observations. And that brings us to the next important definition of a cyclic group. What do we mean by cyclic groups? Cyclic groups are special groups which can be generated by one of the elements of the group. The easiest example I can give you is this set of all 4th roots of unity under multiplication. What do you mean by generating? By generating, I mean that any element of the group, if any element, say G, of the group can be expressed as the repeated answer when a particular number is operated on itself. Any element can be expressed in this form, then G is a cyclic group generated by A. Now do you understand that? Let's take the 4th roots of unity as an example. Let's take this as an example. I claim that I is a generator. I is a generator of this group. Let's call this group as U4. How do I believe that? I power 1 is I, so I get back I. I is expressed using itself. I square is minus 1. So minus 1 is I star I. And I power 3 is I star I, which is minus I. And I power 4 is I star minus I, which is 1. So every element plus 1, minus 1, plus I, minus I has been expressed using a single element I. Therefore, I generates the group. That's enough. I don't need any other element to express all elements of the group. I alone is enough. But coincidentally, minus I can also be identified as a generator. Minus I to the power of 1 is minus I. Minus I whole squared is minus 1. Minus I to the power of 3 is plus I. And minus I to the power of 4 is plus 1. All 4 elements can also be expressed using minus I. So I generates U4, minus I also generates U4. Such groups are cyclic groups. Because why do you call them cyclic? Because from I you go to minus 1, from minus 1 you come to minus I, from minus I you go to plus 1, and after that you come back to I. They go around in a cycle. You start with I, you start doing powers of I, you will just keep getting the same elements of the group. It never goes outside. That's why I call them as a cyclic group. Another example of cyclic groups can be given using Z8 plus 8, the ones we just discussed some time before. Z8 plus 8 is also a cyclic group. What do we mean by cyclic group? There should be some element which generates all of the elements in the group. And what can that element be? That element can be 3. Because 3 written alone is 3. 3 added with 3 is going to give me 6. 3 with 3 with 3 again is actually going to give me 9. But 9 is greater than 8. So you divide 9 by 8 and return the remainder, that's 1. 3 added with it 4 times is actually 12 in usual addition. But since we are doing addition modulo, it returns the remainder of 4. 3 added with itself 5 times. 3, 3, 3, 3, 5 times is going to give 15, but 15 returns a remainder of 7 when you divide by 8. Now when you do it 6 times, it's going to give us 18, but 18 is equivalent to the remainder of 18 when you divide that by 8. 18 gives a remainder of 2. Do it 7 times, you're going to get 25. So you're going to get 21, and 21 is actually leaving you a remainder of 5. And for the last step, when you add it 8 times, you are bound to get 24, which is actually 0. So going back to the actual set of all reminders, when you divide a number by 8, there are only 8 reminders possible. 0 is here, 1 here, 2 is here, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All elements have been generated by the single element 3. Therefore you will say that 3 generates the group Z8 plus 8. What's interesting is the inverse of 3, 5 will also generate the group Z8 plus 8. To give you more surprise, 7 will also generate, so will 1. All of these will generate the entire group. So all of these are generators of the group, which means this is actually a cyclic group. Because you keep adding parts. You have added 3 8 times. Now when you add 3 9 times, you're going to get a 27, and 27 is nothing but a 3. So once again the chain starts 3 6 1 4 7 2 5 0, and again 3 6 1 4 7 2 5 0. You're going to keep moving around in cycles. That's why you call this group as a cyclic group. We saw in the previous slide that minus I is also a generator. So I was a generator, minus I is also a generator. You can have more than one generator for a cyclic. You can have, but it's not necessary. It's enough if there is one number doing all this work. That's enough to call it as a cyclic group. So the cyclic group is a most important classification of groups. Groups which are cyclic have specific properties which we'll take it up for discussion. The one property that we'll discuss today is that all cyclic groups are all cyclic groups are also abelian. All cyclic groups are abelian. So whenever you find any group that is cyclic, you don't have to worry about the operation being commutative. It will automatically be commutative. That's what I have stated as a result, and we can prove this very simply. So let's take a group G star, and let's assume the group G star is generated by an element A. So X is probably A operated on itself T times, T1 times, and Y is A operated on A T2 times. Now we can show that the group is abelian if I tell you that X star Y and Y star X are the same answer. That's what you mean by an abelian group. The order does not affect the answer. What is X star Y? X star Y is A operating on itself for a total of T1 plus T2 times. Y star X is also the same, A on itself T1 plus T2 times. So they don't actually differ, they are one and the same. So we will wind up today's lecture with one question. Now I have stated that all cyclic groups are abelian. I want you to focus on its converse. What about abelian groups? Are all abelian groups also cyclic? Are all abelian groups also cyclic? I am not even asking you to consider non-abelian groups. I am directly giving you the relaxation to consider only abelian groups. Now you will have to find out whether all such abelian groups are cyclic. We have discussed around 10 to 15 examples of groups. Some of them are abelian, some of them are non-abelian. You can focus only on the abelian groups. And I have also shown you what it means to have a cyclic group. Now your task is to show or to find out whether all abelian groups by default become cyclic. With that, we will wrap up today's session. We have discussed a few properties of groups. We have had a look at two special classes of groups, the abelian groups and the cyclic groups. We have had an introduction to what is called as a subgroup. We have seen a few tests to find out whether a given subset actually becomes a subgroup, and that's where we will stop today. We also had a look at cyclic groups. Tomorrow we will answer the question that I have asked, and we will proceed to what we call as normal subgroups. That part of it we will discuss in the next class. Thank you.